Hi, and welcome to Mythorama, the video where I do a dive into different myths and folklores of the world. This time we are taking a look at Celtic folklore. I'm really excited. This is one of my favorite groups of folklore. So to start out, let's just do a quick overview of what we mean when we say Celtic. The Celtic peoples is a group of people in history that go back to Roman times, originally coming out of the group of people called the Gauls. At this point, there are a couple different nations that are considered Celtic. I'm going to go over them. This is not by any means a completely exclusive list. There's a lot of variation depending on who you ask, where and what is considered Celtic, but these are some of the most commonly discussed ones. So first, we're just going over from left to right on this map. We have Galicia in Spain, Brittany in France, Cornwall in England, Wales, which is part of Great Britain, Ireland, the Isle of Man, and Scotland. Now, those three countries that are highlighted in green on our list are the places that I will primarily be talking about and whose mythology and folklore we are going to be looking into. They are the ones I know the most about, and they are what most people typically think of when you hear the word Celtic. So our first story we are going to be reading is Finn McCool and the Formation of the Giant's Causeway. This is a myth from Ireland. This is a story from Ulster, the most northern of Ireland's ancient kingdoms. Ulster is a land that is fabulously beautiful. It has towering cliffs and rocky hills, winding rivers, and lakes that look like they were scooped out of the land by giants. One of its most famous features is the arrangement of large cliffs leading to the sea called the Giant's Causeway, which you can see in the picture here. Stories are told of one great Irish giant, Finn McCool, whose most fearsome enemies were the Scottish giants. Finn was so angry, determined to fight these Scottish giants, that he built a whole causeway from Ulster across the sea to Scotland. He built it of unusual six-sided cobblestones, so they would fit neatly together like a honeycomb, and they made a very pretty pavement. One day, Finn shouted a challenge to the Scottish giant Benadonner, also called the Red Man, to cross the causeway and fight him. But as soon as he saw Benadonner getting closer and closer on the causeway, he realized the Scottish giant was much, much bigger than he had imagined, and would be quite a fearsome foe to fight. Finn ran back home and told his wife that he'd picked a fight that he now needed a way to get out of. Finn's wife, Unag, thought quickly and told Finn to go and hide himself in the bathtub and let her take care of things. Benadonner soon came knocking at the door and was greeted by Unag. "Oh, it's a pity that you are here now. Finn's gone away hunting deer in County Kerry," she said. "Would you like to come in anyway and wait for him? I'll show you into the great hall, and you can have a seat and have something to eat after your long journey across the sea." Benadonner took her up on her offer. She told him, "Oh, put your spear down there by the door. You can set it right next to this new one that Finn started carving. He broke his the other day and has been working on this all night." Benadonner put his spear down and was a little worried when he saw that the half-formed spear he set it next to was made from the whole log of a tall, tall tree. Unag then invited him in and offered to get him something to eat. She handed him a loaf of bread, but little did he know that inside the bread had been put a full boulder. So when he bit into it hungrily, he broke his 3 front teeth. He sat there nursing his jaw, and Unag asked him if anything was wrong. "This is what I normally give my husband for breakfast every day." Benadonner found himself wondering just what he was getting himself into. He wondered even more when Unag slid him what she said was her husband's cup across the table, and it was a whole 5-gallon barrel. He was barely able to lift the thing to take a sip from it, and even though he was quite a bit taller than Unag, he couldn't imagine how tall her husband might be if this was his normal drinking glass. Finally, after waiting around even longer, she offered to invite him back to see the new baby. Well, the baby was in fact a disguised Finn McCool, laying in the bathtub. Benadonner looked down at this infant, who, as far as he was concerned, was the size of a full-grown man, and thought to himself, if this is the size of Finn McCool's baby, how big must the father be? Why, I don't stand a chance against him in a fight. He quickly turned to Unag and thanked her for her hospitality, but said he really needed to be getting home before the tide came back in and blocked the causeway back home to Scotland. As soon as the other giant was out of the house, Finn leapt from the cradle in which he was disguised, thanked Unag for her clever, clever plan, and chased Benadonner to make sure he left Ireland forever. After this encounter, both giants tore up the giant's causeway from either end, leaving just the ragged ends at the 2 shores. The end. Next, we are going to go over some folklore-inspired reads. These are various books that have plots and characters that are inspired by Celtic folklore. Most of these are middle grade reads. So our first novel is The Selkie of San Francisco by Todd Calgi Calicano. This is part of a series of novels called the Sam London Adventures that feature a team of young heroes who have to deal with various different mythical wildlife invading our normal everyday world. They are sort of similar in tone and style to the Percy Jackson. They don't go particularly in depth into the folklore they pull these creatures from, I will say. It's more just they take the different names and then sort of it's your typical adventure story. But they are very fun, and I did want to include them on the list in case someone's looking for something with that type of tone. So in this particular one, Sam London didn't mean to uncover an ancient secret, but when he found that mythical creatures are real and living in our national parks, he became the newest recruit to the Department of Mythical Wildlife. Along with Dr. Vance Ventana and the guardian Tashi, Sam pursues the Selkie, who has taken a peculiar interest in fashion's newest it girl and social media star, Pearl Elkland. So these are definitely some fun books to check out. Next, we have the Artemis Fowl novels by Owen Colfer. These take place in Ireland, and they definitely have some of the terminology and a bit of the folklore from Irish mythology, but they are also ones that it's not as historical look into the folklore. It's a much more modern and general novel, but these are actually some old favorites of mine from when I was growing up, and I highly recommend them. It's a really cool world they've created. So there are a bunch of different formats you can read these books in. They have your general novel, a graphic novel version, and an audiobook, and there are e-versions available for all 3 of those formats. So the first one is in the series starts out when 12-year-old evil genius Artemis Fowl tries to restore his family fortune by capturing a fairy and demanding a ransom in gold. The fairies fight back with magic, technology, and a particularly nasty troll. So one of the other fun things about this novel is they start out with the main character, Artemis Fowl, definitely considering himself a criminal mastermind to be, and that is an interesting sort of switch up from your typical goody two-shoes hero. This is the last in my novel recommendations of books that take some of the creatures from folklore and tell a story that isn't specifically grounded in that folklore. But this is another really great book. These ones were my brother's favorite growing up, so I've read a couple of them as well, and they are definitely very fun. These are the Spiderwick Chronicles, written by Holly Black and Tony Ditterlizzi. The first book is called The Field Guide, and there is both a novel, an audiobook version, and some spin-offs that deal with different characters, and some that are just compilations talking about the different creatures in the world. So it all starts when Jared Grace finds their great uncle's book, Arthur Spiderwick's Field Guide to the Fantastic World Around You, and the Grace kids realize that they are not alone in their new house. Now the kids want to tell their story, but the fairies will do everything they can to stop them. So these ones are definitely really cool and worth checking out. And now we will get into some of the books I want to recommend that are a bit more grounded in the folklore and take the sort of shape and style of older myth. First of these ones this is among my top 10 favorite book series of all time. The Tiffany Aching series, written by Terry Pratchett. This definitely takes its inspiration from specifically Scottish folklore, but also a bit of just your general British Isles style. The first book in the series is called The Wee Free Men. There is an audiobook and a novel format, and e-versions are available for both. Armed with only a frying pan and her common sense, young witch-to-be Tiffany Aching must defend her home against the monsters of fairyland. Luckily, she has some very unusual help. The local Nac MacFeagle, aka the Wee Free Men, a clan of fierce, sheep-stealing, sword-wielding, 6-inch-high blue men. Together they must face headless horsemen, ferocious grimhounds, terrifying dreams come true, and ultimately, the sinister Queen of the Elves herself. If you want to get a bit more of an idea of this book, there is a video up on our YouTube called Book Tasting with Miss Sarah, where I talk a bit more about why I enjoy it so much, what the overall characters and series is like, and I actually read a bit of it, and you can hear me attempt to do a very, very terrible Scottish accent, as well as seeing my unfortunate quarantine haircut. Alright, my next recommendation is called The Selkie Girl by Janice McKay. This is based off a Scottish myth, and it is a picture book, but I think it is a beautiful retelling of the original Selkie myth. Fergus lives with his father by the sea, but is lonely. He wants a friend more than anything. One day Fergus finds treasure on the beach, a beautiful fur blanket hidden in the rocks. What Fergus doesn't know is that his treasure belongs to someone else, a Selkie girl who's lost her sealskin and can't go home to the sea without it. So the Selkie myth we will actually talk about a little bit more later, but the general way this story has been told is men who marry a Selkie and end up keeping the Selkie skin. And I really like that this normally romantic story is just being retold as a story of friendship and trying to figure out how to keep a friend. I think it's a really sweet way to tell that story. Next we have The Chronicles of Prydain by Lloyd Alexander. These are stories that are directly pulled from Welsh mythology. The first one is called The Book of Three, which has both an audio and print novel version. There are e-versions, various different stories in the overall series. Most of these books deal with young Taran, who wants to be a hero desperately, and his heroic journey starts with him as a pig keeper, which, looking after pig, isn't exactly heroic, even if said pig, Henwen, was a magic pig who could see visions of the future. But one day Henwen vanishes, and Taran is led into an enchanting and perilous world. With his band of followers, he must confront the Horned King and save Henwen before she reveals the secret of how to conquer the land of Prydain. If some of these names sound familiar, this is the story that Disney's old movie The Black Cauldron is based off of. So that is another way, if you want to kind of get a taste for the story before you start reading the book, you can find a DVD copy of The Black Cauldron, which we also have copies of, and watch it. My next recommendation is The Lost Years of Merlin by T.A. Barron. Now, most of the Arthurian legends are more considered English folklore than Celtic, but Merlin was originally a figure in Welsh mythology and is based off an older myth that they have. And this book specifically looks into Welsh mythology and talks about the older version of Merlin before he gets caught up with the King Arthur stuff. So I wanted to include it. This is another one I read as a kid and loved. So obviously it is based on Welsh mythology. This is another one. There's a print novel and audiobook version. An e-version is available for the audiobook. So, spat out by the sea, the boy lay on the rocks as still as death. Even if he survived the day, he had no home, no memory, and no name. So begins the tale of a strange young boy who, having washed up onto the shores of ancient Wales, is determined to find his real home and his true name. One day, he will become the greatest wizard of all time. But he knows nothing of this now. And the last things I wanted to recommend are actually movies, not books, but these two movies are made by an Irish film company and deal directly with bits of Irish folklore and history, and they are just beautiful movies. I mean, they have beautiful stories, beautiful animation, and music that is absolutely enchanting and will be stuck in your head for days after you watch them. So I really want to recommend them. They're not, this company and their work has gained popularity, but they are still not huge, and I just really want to bring them to more people's attention. So the first movie with the picture on the left here is called Song of the Sea. This is another story that deals directly with the Celtic myth, which there are different versions from both Scotland and Ireland. This is based a bit more on the Irish version of the myth. When Saoirse and Ben's mother mysteriously disappears into the ocean, the two children go on an epic journey to find out the truth about her, and in the process discover mystical secrets about both their mother and Saoirse herself. This is a really cool one that tells a lot about the fairy world in Irish mythology. It also has one of the cutest animated dogs I have ever seen, ever, who you can see on the cover picture there. His name is Coo, and he's a very good boy. The next one is The Secret of Kells. This one has a little bit more of a historical bent, talking about the old monasteries in Ireland and early Celtic Christianity, but it also deals with the mystical world and sort of the meeting of the mystical world and the historical world. In a remote medieval outpost of Ireland, young Brendan embarks on a new life adventure when a celebrated master illuminator arrives from foreign lands carrying a book brimming with secret wisdom and powers. To help complete the magical book, Brendan has to overcome his deepest fears on a dangerous quest that takes him into the enchanted forest, where mythical creatures hide. So I hope you enjoyed these different recommendations and they've helped you find a great new book to read or movie to watch. Next we are going to be hearing the story of Manawydan, son of Lair. This is a story from a group of myths called the Mabinogi or the Mabinogion. These are some of the foundational myths of Welsh mythology, and this is some of the earliest work we know coming from Wales. Manawydan, son of Lair, is from the third branch. There are 4 branches to the Mabinogi, which all tell different stories with just a few characters who sort of branch the different stories, but the third branch is one of the stories I like best. Pryderi was the king of the land of Dyfed in Wales, who had long been at war in Ireland, was finally able to come home. Coming with him, returning to the land, was his best friend Manawydan, and they were the only 2 survivors of this long and bloody war. They become so close in their time fighting together that upon returning, Pryderi quickly told Manawydan that he should marry Rhiannon, one of his family members, who had been waiting at home for him to return with his wife Sigfa. The 4 of them, Pryderi, Sigfa, Rhiannon, and Manawydan, became the closest friends and went traveling around the land of Dyfed, admiring its beauty and bounty. One day, on their travels, there was a clap of thunder, a bright light, and a magical mist descended across the land. After the light passed, they looked around and found the land that had once been full of farmers and livestock lay empty before them, with no people to be found and only wild beasts. Pryderi and Manawydan decided to go out hunting, try to find something to eat, and as they were going through the woods, they came across a massive white boar. Pryderi and Manawydan, they quickly started following it, trying to hunt it down, until it ran into a creepy abandoned castle in the middle of the woods. It was just sitting there. There'd never been a castle there before. They hunted in these woods all the time. Well, Pryderi gets off his horse and decides to go check out the castle, and looks back to Manawydan. "Aren't you coming?" Manawydan, being the genre-savvy fellow he was, he said, "No, absolutely not. We live in the ancient world, and this is a creepy castle that just appeared in the woods where there was no castle before. I am not going in there. Nothing good ever happens from going into creepy abandoned castles in the woods. You are out of your mind." Pryderi says, "Come on, it's not going to be that bad. We can do it. Let's go. We're heroes." Manawydan said, "No, it's your funeral. See you. Bye. I'll wait out here on my horse, and if you don't come back out after 10 minutes, I'm going home. It was nice knowing you." Well, Pryderi goes on in, and inside finds nothing in the castle, except in the middle of the great hall, there was a huge gold bowl on a pedestal, just sitting in the hall, nothing around it. And like the absolute fool he was, he went up and he touched the golden bowl. And then he got frozen. He's just standing there. He can't move, can't pull his hand away, nothing. Manawydan was a bit of a nicer friend than he pretended to be. He came into the castle when Pryderi didn't come back out, but then took one look at him, standing in the great hall with his hand on a bowl, and after a bit of shouting and waving at him when Pryderi didn't respond at all, he turned around and went back home. Sigfa and Rhiannon asked what had happened when they were out hunting, why he was coming home alone, and where Pryderi was. He explained the whole deal about how Pryderi did something completely ridiculous, going into an abandoned castle in the woods and touching what was clearly a sort of magical artifact, and now had gotten himself frozen in place, and there was nothing they could do about it, and they should probably all just try to get on with their lives. Well, Rhiannon wasn't having any of that. Pryderi was family, so she went out following the path that Manawydan described, got to the castle herself, tried to pull Pryderi away from the magic bowl. That did nothing, and then in the process she touched it and also got herself frozen in place. So at that point, Manawydan and Sigfa, well, they knew that they were going to have to try to get along with their life. They had some crops, and it was about time to harvest those crops. So they had 3 different fields set up that were all ready to harvest, and Manawydan went to bed that night saying in the morning he would take care of the first field. Well, he got up in the morning, went outside, looked in front of him, and found that the field that the night before had been completely full of various grains ready to harvest was empty, which was weird. No idea where all of the grains had gone. So he decided to, he spent the day looking around, walking through the field, trying to find some evidence of what had happened. Couldn't find anything. Went to bed, woke up the next day, went to the second field, same thing had happened. Well, 1 time is a coincidence, 2 times is a pattern. He decided to stay up that night, watch the field, and see what happened. He stayed awake all night, started to hear rustling, looked up, and found what had been stealing all the grain. It was mice, but not just a few mice. An entire army of mice going across the field and absolutely decimating it, eating every piece of grain. Well, he started running toward the field, shouting, and trying to chase the mice. Most of them got away, but there was one very, very fat mouse who was a bit slower than all the other mice that he was able to grab. He brought the mouse back inside and put it in a tiny little cage as a little mouse jail, and let the mouse know that he was going to make it pay for its crimes. How was he going to make the mouse pay? By hanging it on a tiny, tiny little gallows. So he got out his, ancient medieval crafting kit and started making a tiny, tiny little gallows from which to hang the mouse for its mouse crimes. He went out the next morning onto the road and gave the mouse a little trial and started to have it walk up the gallows to face its fate. When along the road first came a monk, and the monk said, "Hey, what are you doing?" And Manawydan explained, "I'm making this mouse pay for its mouse crimes. It's going to be hung as a thief." The monk said, "No, that's weird. Stop doing that. Leave the poor mouse alone." And Manawydan refused, and the monk offered to buy the mouse, to essentially pay for its crimes with a piece of gold. And Manawydan said, "No, that's not. My fields are worth a lot more than that. I'm going to go through with this." And so the monk shook his head very sadly and went along the road. Now, after a few more minutes, before Manawydan could get through giving the whole speech about the mouse paying for its crimes, a priest came along the road. Now, Manawydan was starting to realize this was a bit weird because, up until yesterday, there were no other people in the entire country of Wales. And now, not only had he seen 1 person, but 2. So he looked up to the priest and asked him, "What are you doing? How are you here? Where are you going?" All those questions. And the priest explained that he was on pilgrimage and asked Manawydan, "What are you doing? Why do you have a tiny, tiny gallows and a mouse?" And the whole process started again, with Manawydan explaining that the mouse was a criminal and he was punishing the criminal, as was his right as a lord in the land. The priest offered 2 gold pieces to try to free the mouse. Manawydan, figuring something was up here, he refused. The priest continued along the road, and now Manawydan decided not to rush along with his impromptu mouse execution, but to wait and see what was going to happen. Lo and behold, a bishop came across the road with a full entourage. Now Manawydan was really suspicious of this situation. So he spoke with the bishop and decided not just to speak, but as he was speaking, to carry out the act of putting the little tiny noose around the mouse's head. And the bishop first offered 3 gold pieces. No deal. "I'll give you 10 gold pieces." No deal. "I'll give you 100 gold pieces." No deal. Finally, the bishop was like, "Just stop. What do you want? Tell me whatever you want. I will give it to you. Just stop trying to execute the mouse." Manawydan made his deal. He wanted the return of Pryderi and Rhiannon and the lifting of the curse across the whole of Wales. The bishop just sat and smiled and said, "You are pretty smart." The air shimmered around him and revealed him not to be a bishop, but one of the high lords of the fairy, who had placed the curse on Wales in revenge for a wrong done to him by Pryderi, but was more than willing to lift the curse in exchange for the life of his wife, who was currently shape-shifted into the very mouse Manawydan was trying to execute. The deal was struck, and that is how Manawydan used his wits and a bit of trickery to outsmart the fairy, save the lives of his friends, his wife, and all of Wales. The end. So this last bit I'm going to do is a new segment I'm adding called Featured Creatures, where I give my opinions and ratings of a couple of different creatures from the folklore we are talking about. Now, for Celtic folklore, you have to start with the fair folk. The Sidhe, the elves, the fairies. They're iconic, they're classics. They have an entire genre of literature named after them. There are a lot of different variants depending on the region of Celtic lands you are working with. And that includes, in the Scottish tradition, there's the Seelie and Unseelie courts. The Seelie courts being considered to be sort of your good, kindly fairies who help out humanity, and the Unseelie courts being a bit more dark and mischievous. And that's sort of a pretty common trait with the fair folk. They can be good in one story and helpful, and mischievous or dangerous in another. It depends on what tradition you're working with, what court you're working with, and sometimes just the mood and how bored the fairy is. Your general rule of thumb you want to use when dealing with the fair folk: do not give them your true name. They can use it to control you. If you're in fairyland, do not eat or drink anything. You will be stuck there forever. Treat the fair folk with the utmost of courtesy, but take anything you are told with a grain of salt. The fair folk cannot lie outright to you, but they are masters at twisting their words and talking in riddles to get around this rule. The fair folk get a 10 out of 10, and this rating is totally earned and not just given because they are famous for ruining the lives of anyone who feels has insulted them. And I'm not scared. What are you talking about? The corgi, or the fairy mount, is the only mythical creature from Celtic folklore that you will be able to find out and about on your average street. They are said to be the preferred method of transportation for fairies, especially when going into battle, and their magical origins are considered to be part of why they are such a smart breed of dog. The ancient story states that two children were running through the forest when they stumbled upon the funeral of a fairy. The mourning fairies attending the funeral gave the children two small corgi puppies, and the children took them home, introducing the breed into the human world. Let me show you in this next clip my own fairy steed named Baxter. So this is Baxter, my own little fairy steed. And if you take a look at him, you see how his fur makes this kind of looped shape. And corgis in general, they tend to have really thick fur here on their shoulders, and it gets thick on their backs there, but it's a little thinner in the middle. And that's said to be both the shape of the fur pattern and the thickness. It's said to be a leftover from when they were wearing their saddles to take the fairies into battle. And I can confirm, having my own corgi, they are very magical creatures. All right, thank you for helping us, Baxter. Good boy. Next, we have Selkies, who have already come up a bit in some of the various recommendations. Selkies are women who can transform into seals. They are typically said to have very pale skin, dark eyes, and black or green hair that sort of blends in with seaweed while they're swimming. If their seal skin is stolen or lost, they cannot return to their peoples and cannot return to the sea. The most common myth, that including the Selkies, describes describes a fisherman or a lighthouse keeper marrying a Selkie and then locking away her sealskin so she cannot go home and is sort of trapped with him. Normally she gets it back at some point in the end, but these are very, very tragic stories. So 9 out of 10 for the Selkies. They are wonderful. Negative 100 out of 10 for their jerk husbands. These lovely, lovely seal ladies deserve to be treated better. Next, we have the Kelpies. Kelpies normally look like a giant horse whose mane is dripping wet. They are normally black horses, and they tend to hang around ponds and lakes. If someone tries to ride this horse, their hand will get stuck to its back. They have weirdly sticky skin, and the Kelpie will then dive into the water, drown the person who's trying to ride them, and eat them. Their favorite food is young children. If you can find a Kelpie's bridle and manage to get it on the horse, you will then be able to command the horse and safely ride it, and they are said to be incredibly fast, strong horses. These creatures are probably invented as a way to warn young children off from both playing unsupervised around large bodies of water, because in the ancient world you couldn't just go to your local YMCA or city pool and get swimming lessons, so a lot of people drowned, and also possibly as a way to tell them not to go around trying to ride strange horses. Horses were pretty much the most expensive thing you could own in the ancient world, and the punishment for horse thievery was normally death, so not something you want your kids to accidentally find themselves getting blamed for. As a mythical creature, give it a 6 out of 10. Very fearsome, awe-inspiring, but points off for eating kids. Not cool. Next we have the Benai. The Benai, and I hope I am pronouncing that right, I'm doing my best, is an omen of death. She looks like an old washerwoman washing the grave clothes of someone who is about to die in a lonely stream. If you can sneak up on her and catch her, she will impart wisdom on you. If she catches you, she probably will try to eat you. If she is singing a dirge or like a morning song while doing the washing, that the person whose clothes she's washing is going to die a particularly painful and violent death. She gets a 6 out of 10. She gets points off because one of the ways to avoid becoming a Benai after you die is to make sure all of your laundry is done before you die, and I just don't need that extra stress in my life. I'm already about to die, don't need to be worrying about my chores. Next we have the Brownie. The Brownie is a helpful household spirit who will come out at night to assist with chores and farm work. They look like a, small little person. You typically will leave out a bowl of cream or a small cake by your hearth or fireplace as an offering to the Brownie. Thanks for its help. They are very shy creatures and you tend not to see them. They'll use their magic to be invisible, but they do have a little bit of a mischievous streak and enjoy playing harmless pranks. However, they can be very easily offended, and if they feel you have insulted them, they will leave the house and take with them all of the good luck and prosperity from that place. In extreme cases, they will turn into what is called a boggart and torment the household, breaking things, just making a general mess, harassing the farm animals so they try to run away. You don't want that to end up. So 7 out of 10. I will admit some of that rating is because they tend to only be found in the British Isles, and I would really love a Brownie to come over to the US and help me with my housework. I will promise not to offend you if you show up. Alright, next we have a classic queen, Scotland's most famous cryptid, Nessie, the Loch Ness Monster. She lives in Loch Ness and is typically thought to be some sort of long-necked water creature. Some comparisons have been made to certain aquatic dinosaurs. She is the subject of hundreds of searches and investigations, with the first reported sighting being made in the 6th century by St. Columba, swimming in the River Ness, connected to Loch Ness. Most people are convinced she's only a myth these days. The lengths people have gone to both prove and disprove this are just insane to me. She gets a 9 out of 10. She's amazing. And finally, we get the Wolver, my personal favorite creature in Scottish folklore. He is the sweetest wolf man you will ever meet. He's said to look like a man covered in hair with a wolf's head, and he's very peaceful and friendly, only harming people if he's provoked and harmed first. And his favorite thing to do is to fish. And he will, if you sit down and fish with him, he is known to share his catch with you. But the detail I love the most is that if a wolver learns there is a poor family living in a town near him, he will come in the middle of the night and leave freshly caught fish on these people's windowsills so they have something to eat. Wolver gets 20 out of 10. He is the best boy. Now, that is all I have. I hope you enjoyed this video and had some fun with it, and I will see you all next month. You know, this really isn't that bad. Miss Jen's corgis had to act out an entire story time. They had to wear headbands and act out Little Bunny Foo-Foo. I'm just asking you to stand in place for a minute. Well, yes, I know that you didn't sign up for show business. I'm just saying it could be a lot worse. I'm not asking that much of you. All right, well, I appreciate your cooperation and volunteering. This is educational for the children. They'll be very thankful.